Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today, the notorious Martinfish comes back from the underworld. For those uninitiated, Martinfish is the child of Stockfish and Martin that was never supposed to be born. In this episode, Martinfish will play with a ratio of 80 to 20, meaning that 80% of the time it will play a top engine move, and 20% of the time it will play a Martin move. This process will be random, so I won't know if a given move is brilliant or just Martin. This bot was made possible by wintrcat, who has previously made awesome bots for this channel. Go check out his channel after this video. We'll go ahead and start with d4. No point in playing anything too weird, we just want a solid game. We're met with knight to f6, sure. Normal development, d5. Could turn into a Grunfeld, but no, we get c5 instead. I always play c3 in response. Queen to b6, okay. Clearly the most critical line of the London, going straight for b2. Now, this critical line is something I've talked about in this channel before, because I like to play the really interesting move here, knight to a3, with the kind of weird idea that if queen takes b2, I play knight to b5, threatening knight to c7, forking the king and the rook. So the opponent has to defend that. They play knight to a6 usually, defending the c7 square, and then I change gears altogether. I play rook to b1. And this can go one of two ways. Queen takes a2, rook to a1, queen back to b2, rook back to b1, and then threefold repetition. Or after rook to a1 and queen back to b2, you can sacrifice the rook for the knight on a6, and after the recapture, once again you can play knight c7 and take the rook. It's just a very, very messy position to play. So sometimes if I'm playing like a much stronger player, I'll just settle for rook to b1, rook to a1, and it's a neat little trick to have in your pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and play knight to a3 here. We're met with c4, which is kind of like the critical response. It cuts off the bishop's protection of the b5 square, so there's no more ideas of knight to b5. Rook to b1 is basically forced. We're met with bishop to f5. We can go ahead and intercept that bishop by playing the knight back to c2. And we get knight to c6. So far, pretty strong moves by Martinfish. I don't think we've gotten any Martin moves yet, because this all seems pretty strong, pretty critical. We'll go ahead and continue development with knight to f3, bishop e2, castles, and we'll see how the position kind of unfolds here. Okay, we're met with e6, sure, bishop to e2. h6 is kind of a random move. It's not really in line with any of the main ideas, so I would not be surprised if that was a Martin move. I'm not going to spend the whole video trying to guess what a Martin move was, but like it's kind of entertaining for me. I'm going to go ahead and castle out of the way. We do get bishop back to e7. That's definitely a Stockfish move. All right, let's see. What is our plan here? The only issue with the knight to a3 line is that if your opponent isn't a human being and doesn't bite because they don't see what your idea is, and even more so if they play the critical line exactly how it's supposed to be played, you end up in this position where the knight is pinned to the rook and the rook is stuck defending the pawn, which you could counter argue, well, yeah, but then the queen is stuck attacking a pawn and the bishop is busy attacking a knight. Sure, even Steven kind of, but I'm the one with the pressure. I'm the one that has to hold down the position. Let's go ahead and kind of play the prophylactic move h3. Obviously creates an escape square, creates a drop point for the bishop, and controls g4. Doesn't really accomplish much else besides that, but I'm kind of waiting a turn here. If it's Stockfish, he'll probably just castle. Queen to a6. How peculiar. Actually, this might also be a Stockfish move, because the idea of hitting the a2 pawn is that if you don't just play rook to a1 and go back and forth, and instead you play a3, you weaken the b3 square, there's ideas of knight to a5, knight to b3, and suddenly your position becomes a lot more cramped than it was a second ago, especially if he decides to play b5, a5, b4 right after, and then your queen side is basically just being, well, destroyed. So instead of playing a3, we have the option here to play rook to a1, unpin the knight, defend the a2 pawn, and I don't see how he would actually follow up after that. So we'll go ahead and play rook to a1 here. Okay, we do get castles. Very solid, very concrete. There's the very curious move here, b3. And I say it's very curious because obviously he can't capture, the pawn is pinned. So it allows me to A, put some pressure on the c4 pawn, and B, potentially look for b4 and kind of gain some space for myself on the queen side. The only issue with this move is that it weakens c3, and that's generally why in the London you don't want to move the b2 pawn. So something like knight to e4 could be very annoying right after. So maybe not b3 right now. let's see, what other options do we have here? Maybe knight to e5. Start fighting for the center. Seems concrete enough, so we'll go ahead and play knight to e5. Okay, we're met with bishop back to h7, which safeguards the bishop that sees into our queen side, which makes decent enough sense in my book. And now I'd kind of like to reroute this knight. It feels very misplaced as it is on c2. I think it would make a lot more sense to have this knight on f3, where it can either drop back to d2 and fight for e4, or reinforce the knight on e5. If the queen does come back to harass this pawn, we can always play queen to c1, which is really the main line most people play, where I had played knight to a3. Most grandmasters, for example, would play queen to c1. Those that frequent the London will play queen to c1, defend the b2 pawn. So we'll play knight back to e1. We get b5 right away, fighting for space on the queen side. We could play a3 here to slow down the process, which forces something like queen to b6, a5, b4. And if we do get knight to a5, knight to b3, we might have to just deal with it. Because I can't really allow b4 here, opening up the queen side, getting the open file, so we'll play a3. We do get knight to a5, which is very annoying, and it is going to harass my rook quite a bit. Oh, but I just realized I didn't actually calculate how I'm going to get my rook out of danger. Okay, seems like it was probably necessary to trade the knights first. I don't know how that didn't even occur to me in the first place, and then play a3. That's actually quite frustrating. I don't even have a4 here, because if knight to b3 and I take, the queen just dives into a1 because the rooks are disconnected. Wow, that's really frustrating. Okay, since we are playing this against Martinfish, and kind of the point of this is that if it was Stockfish, I would lose, but since it's Martinfish, I have a 20% chance of, on any given move, getting a terrible Martin move. I'm going to play for a kingside attack here. I'm going to play knight to f3, and after knight to b3, I'm just going to, I guess, wave goodbye to the rook. I guess I could play rook to a2. Somehow that's less convincing, but it might be necessary. Anyways, we're going to play knight to f3, knight to b3, maybe we will play rook to a2, and then I'm going to play something like g4, g5, and just storm the kingside as fast as I can, blitz attack basically, the queen is on the opposite side of the board, and at some point we might get a critical blunder by Martin. So let's give that a try. Knight to f3, knight to e4 is actually not a bad move. It's not as annoying as knight to b3, and it cuts off the bishop, so this might have been a Martin move. But it's not objectively bad. It centralizes the knight. Let's go ahead. If I play g4 here, is f6 going to be a huge issue? Knight to d7 is the only safe square. Rook moves to attack the knight. I move back and I lose a pawn. Okay, this might have actually been a Stockfish move after all, because it stops the idea of g4, which was kind of the whole point of what I just did. Let's make some space for this knight in case we do get f6. So let's play knight to d2. And then we have the option to play knight back to f3 after. Okay, and we also temporarily cover this square. Oh, I just realized there was takes, takes, and knight to b3. So I'm assuming that's a Martin move. Wow. So that was definitely a blunder. Let's go ahead and capture now that we're a step ahead. Queen to d6. Yes, it happened. Yes, it finally happened. I won't delay. Give me the queen. Oh, goodness. It's happened. We're winning again. Okay. If I can beat, how do I finish this off as quickly as possible? I want to end this spectacularly. Like bishop to h5, g6, I sacrifice, takes, queen to f3, and it just everything rains down on Martin. That would be my dream ending for this game. Let's give it a try. Bishop to h5. Bishop takes, sure, I'll recapture. Bishop to f5. I just want to like storm his position now. g4. But then bishop to e4 stops queen to f3. So maybe not. Maybe not that. What about queen to f3 here? If the bishop moves anywhere, I take on f7, so then g4 is actually a concrete threat. Knight to c6. Okay, so if I play g4 here, how are you going to defend this? Bishop to g6, takes, super weak pawn structure. Looks good to me. Okay, he takes the bishop. Obviously, I can't take. The queen is under attack, so I'll recapture. Bishop to g6, sure, I'll take. Weakens the pawn structure severely. It's not as spectacular as I was hoping for, but I'm going to play rook to d1 so we can play e4 and challenge the center. We do get d4, which looks like a free pawn, which I'll accept. And then g5. Double the rooks. Doubled rooks are happy rooks. We'll take, and we're the only ones in control of the open file. Obviously hits the queen, we'll go back, double the, I was gonna say double the rooks, double the queen and the rook, I guess. Fight for the back rank, we get a rook trade, which is excellent. Now we're just gonna basically munch up all of his pawns, so. All right, now that we've munched up all of his pawns, promote. All right, we have more than enough pieces here to make checkmate. I just have to not stalemate him in the process. So I'm gonna push these pawns. Check, kind of cool little discovered check. All right, and we have to be able to dive in for mate here. Let's go check. It's gotta be just check until it's mate, I'm sure. Check, sure, check this way, and mate. All right, kind of a scary game. We almost lost the exchange about halfway, but we did manage to defeat Martinfish with 80-20 ratio. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next one.